Alright, good day, everybody. I am recording this lecture video as a substitute to our discussions for the fourth lesson of our subject. Allow me first to give everybody a heads up that I am recording in our house. So if you hear any unnecessary noises, please disregard them and focus on the sound of my voice. And more importantly, take note of the very important points to consider in our discussion. More importantly, on how we are going to best understand, our lesson that we are going to discuss through this lecture video. So for today, we are going to be talking about ESL and the bilingual methods of teaching children. So when we talk about ESL, that commonly refers to the most essential terms relevant to the study of language acquisition, and to demonstrate the ULOA will be operationally defined to establish a common frame of reference, wherein ESL as English or English as second language talks about two components. First is bilingual education, where this contains teaching academic content in two languages, in a native and secondary language with varying amounts of each language used in accordance. Lesson plan, on the other hand, the teacher's detailed description of the course of instruction of learning trajectory for a lesson. So they are both guided with the bilingual education, the academic contents in two languages, as well as the lesson plan or the descriptive, detailed course of instruction that will be utilized by a teacher when he or she is trying to discuss or trying to conduct a particular lesson. Now, to perform the aforesaid big picture, for the first two weeks of our course, we are going to be talking about understanding essential knowledge that will be laid down in the succeeding discussions. Now, take note that you are not limited to exclusively refer to the resources that I will be giving. However, you are expected to utilize other books, research articles, and other resources as well that are available in the library, such as eBrary, search.proquest.com, or the following. Now, let's begin discussing what is ESL. English as a second language, or ESL, or some cases TESL, is a term used which non-native speakers learns English. It is part of the curriculum program of instruction designed to support English language learners, wherein ESL teachers facilitate students in conversing, reading, and writing, and with a focus on cultivating conversational and job-related communication skills. Oftentimes, students enroll in such programs to use the language in work, school, or in abroad. Now, bilingual education, on the other hand, refers to the teaching of academic content in two languages. First, the native language, and then second is what we call the second language, or English, which are used depending on the outcome goal of the model. Bilingual education programs help students who are not exposed to English in their homes and need help learning English. Therefore, English-speaking students may also join in bilingual education programs to become more proficient, especially in the two languages. Now, let's talk about ESL and bilingual methods of teaching children. Firstly, we need to understand what are these different methods. First, we have the direct method. This was developed by Maximilian Berlitz around the 1880s. It is sometimes called the natural method because it uses a slow build-up of skills paired with a lot of vocabulary repetition. The teacher teaches vocabulary through pictures, objects, and elaborate pantomime. Props and TPR, visual cues, are also extremely important in this particular method. The students figure out the grammar as they go, partially through imitation and partially by trial and error. Therefore, with direct method, it is more hands-on kasi nga you need to become the main facilitator through the use of pictures, objects, and pantomime. Now, another method is the audiolingual method. This is known as the Army method and later on as the audiolingual method, or the ALM. The ALM teaches grammatical structure patterns and vocabulary through the repetition and memorization of set phrases or dialogues. Drills are used to teach structural patterns, while set phrases are memorized with a focus on intonation. Grammatical explanations are kept to a minimum. However, vocabulary is taught in context. Audiovisual aids are used with a focus on pronunciation. Therefore, the correct responses are positively reinforced immediately. Another is the classical method, known as the grammar translation method. The teacher directs the lessons focusing on rote memory to learn vocabulary and the rules of grammar. Learners attended to reading, rules, and repetition to gain knowledge about the language, grammar, and vocabulary. Going back, so classical method is also known as the grammar translation method, wherein the teacher directs lessons focusing on rote memory to learn vocabulary and the rules of grammar. The learners attended to reading, rules, and repetition to gain knowledge about the language, grammar, and vocabulary. This is neglecting how to speak it or communicate through social engagement. Kasi nga, it is focused solely on rote memory to learn vocabulary. While if we compare it with the other two, audiolingual and direct, in direct class, there is more, it is called the natural method because you try to build up the skills paired with the vocabulary repetition. So there is now practice, there is now a how to speak it. And the focus now is the use of pictures, objects, and elaborate pantomime. So nagyo action, no, and there are visual cues. In audiolingual, it is called it is teaching grammatical structure patterns and vocabulary through repetition and memorization of set phrases and dialogue. So there is now conversation. There is now interaction, highlighting vocabulary, intonation, structural patterns, and the correct responses. Kasi nga, it is more on reinforcing responses, the correct responses. So there is now interaction. Classical is solely depicting or solely focusing on rote memorization, wherein the only way to learn vocabulary and the rules of grammar is through memorizing it. Hence, omitting now, no, the phase wherein the learners learn how to speak and just focus on memorizing it. All right. Therefore, social engagement is lesser with classical method. We also have the silent way method, wherein this emphasizes learner autonomy, or the learners now are more in control of their particular in this particular method, wherein the teacher acts merely as a facilitator, trying to encourage students to be more active in their learning. The main of this way of teaching is for the teacher to say very little so students can take control of their own learning. There's a big emphasis on pronunciation, and a large chunk of the lesson focuses on it. This method of learning English follows a structural syllabus and grammar, as well as vocabulary and pronunciation that are constantly drilled and recycled for reinforcement. The teacher evaluates their students through careful observation, and it's even possible that they may never set a formal test, as learners are encouraged to correct their own language errors. So therefore, if we're going to use the silent way method, this is now, as we've mentioned, emphasizing learner autonomy, wherein sila gyud ang magdala with how they learn language and how they learn pronunciation and the different other areas of concentration. So the teacher merely acts as a facilitator by giving little to no, or saying little to no, to none to the students, and more importantly, gives or evaluates the students through careful observation. Therefore, if the teacher sees that the students does not learn, then diha na niya i-correct. Pero all throughout the process, the teacher really lets the students learn on their own. Okay? We also have the lexical method. This early emphasis on receptive skills, especially listening, is essential. Lexical or the decontextualized vocabulary learning is a fully legitimate strategy because the role of grammar as a receptive skill must be recognized. Therefore, the importance of contrast in language awareness should also be recognized. So the teachers now employ extensive, comprehensible language for receptive purposes. Extensive writing should be delayed as long as possible so that nonlinear recording formats such as mind maps, word trees, can become intrinsic to the lexical approach. Therefore, reformulation should be the natural response to student error. Teachers should always react primarily to the content of student language, and the pedagogical chunking should be a frequent classroom activity. So kung yung tag-lexical, this is now focusing on receptive, the responses of your students, wherein listening is more of the main strategy. Okay? So if you are now going to talk about how they are going to learn grammar, they are going to be using, or they are going to be giving the right response, the comprehensive, sabi dito, comprehensive language as receptive purposes. So they are going to respond through the right comprehensive languages in order for the teacher to determine whether or not there is a significant significant understanding of the lessons that are being discussed. Hence, nonlinear recording formats are going to be used. And then if ever that the students do not respond accordingly to what is expected, reformulation is the method to somehow correctly assess and reassess the students. Okay? Now, that's for lexical method. Another is the communicative language teaching. This is also referred to as communicative approach. This considers, or it considers an approach or a methodology. CLT has been seen as a response to ALM, or the audiolingual method. CLT is a holistic approach wherein it doesn't focus only on the traditional structural syllabus, but it also takes into consideration the communicative dimension of language. This focus on accuracy versus fluency is one of the issues not often considered in a discussion of CLT. Freer speaking involves more choice, therefore more ambiguity, and less teacher intervention. So the teacher does have a very important role in the process, and that is setting up activities so that communication actually happens. There is a lot of preparation, such as accuracy practice, in bridging fluency activities. CLT involves equipping students with vocabulary, structures and functions, as well as strategies to enable them to interact successfully. So this is in response to audiolingual method, wherein in audiolingual method, kung maminaw lang ka, communicative approach now on the other hand takes a holistic approach wherein the focus is on the accuracy rather than the fluency. And it is largely involving more choices of learning. Therefore, it should have, or it is expected to have, more ambiguity and less teacher intervention. So the teacher will now have the important role in the process wherein he or she should set up activities wherein communication should actually happen. Dili ng simulations lang. So in order for us to prepare our students to accurately practice the mastery of the language, there should be different activities to bridge fluency in observing the right strategies to enable your students to interact successfully. Now, another is the community language learning. In this particular approach, this is one of the designer methods of language acquisitions that arose in the 1970s, because this is a methodology exclusively suitable for adult learners and not for children. The teacher's role is merely a facilitator that provides support. Therefore, in the basic form of CLL, a maximum of 12 students in a sit-in or in a circle sit-in is required. The teacher, who is termed as the knower, stands outside the circle. So picture it out already. Na circle with 12 students and a teacher sa gawas. The learner and the knower or the teacher agree to language learning, wherein the learner presents to the knower in their first language a message he or she wishes to deliver to another. So the knower now listens and the other learners overhear. So ang conversation ani is, or the communication now is between the learner and the knower. Okay? So the other learners just overhear the conversation. Now the knower restates the learner's message in the second language. Therefore, the learners repeats the second language or the message in the second language in order to the student that gave the message in the first language. Learner raptors from tape or memory and reflects upon the messages exchanged during the language class. Okay, recap natin how this class works. 12 students sit in a circle. The teacher, who is termed here as the knower, stands outside the circle. The knower chooses a particular student that agrees to language learning in a particular manner that one student will give a message to the teacher. Say, for example, the student gives a message to the teacher using Kapampangan or Ilonggo. Now, the knower restates the learner's message in the second language. So from Ilonggo, the knower will now restate it in English. The learners repeats the message in the second language form, or they repeat the message in English to the student who gave it in Ilonggo. Nakuha? So there now forms an interaction between your students and the teachers, wherein the teacher acting as a facilitator that is providing support by translating the message from L1 to L2. Okay, do you follow? So that is what we call community language learning. So this method, as what has been mentioned, is designed, suited for adult learners, kasi you cannot do this to children because ultimately there will be confusion. So that's a method that gained popularity during the 1970s. All right. Another method that we're going to consider is the accelerated learning, or in this case, coined as the Suggestopedia. Suggestopedia is a teaching method developed by the Bulgarian psychotherapist Georgi Lozanov. The approach was based on the power of suggestion in learning, the notion being that positive suggestion would make the learner more receptive and, in turn, stimulate learning, wherein it is divided into three. First, deciphering, wherein the teacher introduces the grammar and lexis of the context, and in most materials, the foreign language text is on the left half of the page with a translation on the right half. Say, for example, meanings are conveyed via the mother tongue, not unlike the bilingual method. In the introduction class, the teacher teaches the material in a playful manner instead of analyzing lexis and grammar of the text in a directive manner. While in the production aspect, the students spontaneously speak in and interact in the target language without interruption or correction. So hayaan mo lang sila. Okay? So those are distinct ways or approaches based on the power of suggestion in learning, wherein the notion is that they need to give positive suggestion in order for them to stimulate learning. Okay. Another approach that is included is the total physical response, wherein a language teaching method, this was a language teaching method developed by James Asher. The method is an example of the comprehension approach to language teaching. This means quickly recognizing the meaning in the language being learned and a means of passively learning the structure of the language itself. Therefore, grammar is not taught explicitly but can be learned from the language input. TPR is a valuable way to learn vocabulary, especially in idiomatic terms such as phrasal verbs, because the instructors limit the number of new vocabulary items given to students at any one time. Therefore, this is to help students differentiate the new words from those previously learned and to facilitate integration with their existing language knowledge. Students can learn between 12 and 36 words for every hour of instruction, depending on their language level and class size. Now, if you're going to use TPR, here is a very good, what do we call this? A very good indicator of success for bilingual programs. So we have now the school indicators, the retention rate, the dropout rate, enrollment in gifted and talented advanced placement programs, as well as enrollment in special education or remedial programs, the test exemption rates, as well as program exiting standard, and the oral language proficiency. Student outcomes as indicators would consider the following: reading and writing proficiency, content area mastery in English, content area mastery in native language, as well as leadership, and then the vision and the goals. At the school level leadership, the following are considered: the school climate, the linkages that we make, school organization and accountability, professional development. At the school level support, this considers the parent involvement kasi nga school level support lang man. Parent involvement, teacher accountability and student assessment, staff selection and recognition, community involvement, and appropriate program models, as well as positive classroom climate. Now, for programmatic and instructional practices, the following are considered: academically challenging curriculum and instruction, higher teacher expectations, and the program articulation. This was found from the Intercultural Development Research Association in 2001. So these indicators of bilingual learning bilingual programs is very much indicative of what the learners will be able to do and what are the different considerations that we are going to use or that we are going to highlight in order for us to have a more strategic approach in developing the bilingual programs in every schools. Now, let's talk about the different developments. Firstly, we have language development, wherein students develop fluency and confidence in understanding, speaking, reading, writing, viewing, and thinking in their first language, and then transfer those abilities to the official or school language for communication and lifelong learning. Another is academic. This is in continuation with the discussion already. So basically, class, if we are going to focus now on the discussion that we've had with bilingual procedures, we are now going to talk about how are the considerations going to be met with the different procedures that is going to be incorporated with our learners and with the suitability of every method and approach that we are going to be using. So please wait for further instructions in the group chat for whatever whatever activities will be given throughout the next few days as we have our asynchronous classes from EMSA 1 as well. Thank you very much, and I hope you learned in our discussion for today.